For the last 29 years, the Alliance for Education has worked to connect community resources to Seattle's public education system. We bring together people, dollars, and great ideas to advance racial equity and educational justice for Seattle students. Over the last 3 decades, we have prepared hundreds of teachers to teach in Seattle classrooms. We have supported thousands of Seattle students when challenges with basic needs kept them from being able to focus on learning. And we've raised millions of dollars to support the district in being as strategic, effective, and equitable as it can be. None of those tremendous outcomes would have been possible if we had tried to do our work alone. We work with the University of Washington, Seattle Public Schools, and the Seattle Education Association, preparing teachers with our Seattle Teacher Residency. We work with Amazon, the Gates Foundation, and the incredible family support workers, counselors, principals, teachers, and staff in our district when we leverage the Right Now Needs Fund to support Seattle students who have gaps in access to housing, food, and more. And we work with leaders in the region's thriving philanthropic community to invest funds in effective and catalytic strategy and innovation for the district. Working in partnership with community is central to our success at the Alliance, and it is our firm belief that it is also central to the success of public school districts. Today's luncheon is focused on collective impact. For us at the Alliance, collective impact is the idea that when community comes together with a shared vision, a clear plan, a strategy to measure progress, and a commitment to ongoing collaboration, lasting positive change can be achieved. We chose this topic because one of our driving questions at the Alliance is, what would it take for the Seattle community to truly come together in support of Seattle students? As Dr. Jones described, Seattle Public Schools is an extraordinary district. We look at it from our seats here in Seattle, but if you look at it compared to public districts across the country, our outcomes are better than many of the best. And many students in Seattle and families have had extraordinarily positive experiences in their schools. I know of so many families who will come to me and say, I love my kid's teacher, I love my kid's school. At the same time, Seattle Public Schools is challenged in ways consistent with other large urban public education systems. Like most large urban systems, we struggle to serve Seattle students equitably. Our students experiencing poverty and our students of color in Seattle are not consistently receiving the education that they deserve in order to thrive academically. And this has been true for decades. So our public education system here in Seattle is both of these things. It's extraordinarily strong, and it's also challenged. But if you were to listen to the media or the community narrative about our district, you would likely only hear the second half of that story. For some reason, Seattle loves to beat up on Seattle Public Schools. And while I'm all for owning the ways our district can and should improve, skipping over our strengths and standing on the sidelines just talking about what isn't working does nothing to move Seattle Public Schools forward. Like our district, Seattle is an extraordinary city. Thanks for the hype down there, Dr. Jones. Like our district, Seattle is an extraordinary city. Our community includes some of the most innovative minds and organizations in the world, some of the most generous philanthropists, and some of the most community-oriented citizens. Many of those folks are right here in this room. If there is a city in the country that has the capacity to truly come together across sectors, neighborhoods, and priorities to fuel positive change for our school system and our students, Seattle is that place. So what would it take to move folks off of the critical sidelines and onto the change-making field on behalf of Seattle schools? We brought together today's panelists to see if we could get some insight on that question. All of our panelists have hands-on experience in catalyzing community engagement to support social change on behalf of equity and justice. And each brings a different approach and perspective, and they're just wonderful people. I'm so excited for all of us to have the chance to learn from these 3 brilliant leaders. At this time, please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage. Michael Brown from Civic Commons, Dr. Shelby Cooley from King County, and Liz Huizar from Southeast Seattle Education Coalition, or CSEC. Thanks for the warm round of applause. I told these panelists that I was delighted to be sitting down with them today because I like them all so much. It's like hanging out with my group of friends and having the best conversation possible. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. Let's kick things off by learning a little bit about our panel. Could you each tell us a little bit about what you do? And we'll start with you, Michael.
Okay, we'll test out and see if my mic is working. Was that a yes?
Yes, that was a yes.
Okay, great. About 6 years ago, I created an entity called Civic Commons, and that was not working, so we'll try this then. So 6 years ago, I created Civic Commons to do something that's incredibly difficult, and that's to build civic muscle. And what civic muscle is, or at least my definition of civic muscle, is leveraging the assets of the various sectors in this region: philanthropy, the public sector, the private sector, nonprofits, and most importantly, community, to work together in a different way to solve the complex, challenging community issues that we have. The way I kind of think about Civic Commons, we're process consultants. So we try to bring tools to those cross-sector community partnerships to build relationships in order to get to outcomes, not outputs.
So testing my mic to make sure it works, right? So hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I hope you're enjoying your lunch. My name is Liz Wiestad, and I'm the Executive Director of Southeast Seattle Education Coalition, or CSEC for short. Please use that. And in my work, I get to bring together different community partners from the Southeast region, to collaborate, to dream, to innovate, to figure out how we can best support our region in accessing education equity. And so the work is really about putting all this together in a room and trying to figure out, how do we find solutions to the things that we know are not working. And the beautiful thing about my work is that we recognize no one solution is going to be the solve everything, but rather by bringing together all of our different purposes, our works, our initiatives, we can actually address the bigger problem at hand. I'm a first-generation college student, and so the work hits home close. My parents had no formal education growing up, and so to be able to come back and support some of that very own community, it's personal, and I think that's what I love the most about the work that I'm doing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby Cooley. I'm the Data and Evaluation Lead at King County for the Children, Youth, and Young Adult Division at DCHS. I've been a public sector researcher for a long time, also doing research in lots of different sectors, from nonprofit to academia. I worked for a few years at Seattle Public Schools, supporting data capacity with the Office of African American Male Achievement, and worked at the Community Center for Education Results from 2015 to 2021, really supporting a lot of data capacity there. And I think I really fell into and found collective impact while I was still in grad school. My first experience was at a grassroots organization, which I think today would probably be considered a collective impact, but at the time it was a group of community leaders, principals, young people, neighborhoods, aunties, all together, really trying to figure out who the young people they were collectively not serving, the young people that were pushed out of the schools. And in this region, it was a neighborhood that was straddling both DC and Maryland, so an unincorporated district. And I think leaving those meeting spaces really made me want to pursue applied research. My earlier career and work really focused in basic research and child social development, and we need basic research, but there's something so unsatisfying when our findings fall behind paywalls and aren't back in the hands of children, family, and community. So for me, really, being that bridge between information from community, from academia, really co-designing and learning alongside youth and not doing research on youth, but with young people, have been some huge motivating factors. So landing at CCR at a time in 2015 when we were really grappling with the role of data. Where is it within our change strategy is something I think a lot about. And really shifting from being kind of a neutral communicator of descriptive information to learning alongside folks have been some of the things motivating me.
Thank you so much. One of the things I love about this panel is they really do come at this question of collective impact from a variety of perspectives. So Michael's sort of in the support and design. CSEC, Liz is on the ground, really working with community, and all of you are in your own way. And Dr. Cooley has done the measurement and really the assessment of how do we know that this strategy is working. So I love all those various perspectives. Each of you has been actively involved in collaborative community efforts on the ground, as I said. Can you tell us about one key element for success with collective impact strategy? What's been a difference maker in achieving the kinds of goals that you've been trying to achieve? Liz, why don't you go ahead?
I'm like, what order? So most definitely it is relationship building and hitting the pavement to try to meet and cultivate relationships, not in pursuit of what can you do for me and what can I do for you, but rather what can we do for collective, for community. And sometimes that might mean meeting without an agenda. And I think that's difficult for us to understand sometimes because we are such a socialized society where productivity is king, but it's relationship building and centering who you know, who you can bring into the room, who's missing from the rooms and the tables that you're at, and how can we cultivate that so that it's the norm. I will say that here in Seattle, we have some work to do, especially with the Seattle freeze that we artificially say exists, but in reality, we can move past it, right? And so I think relationship building is key to trying to push a shared vision together. I'll let my panelists answer further.
I'll just pick up from, once again, can anyone hear me? No. All right, we'll move back to the mic. So just to pick up on what Liz said, I think a key element, an additional element, is the identification of a shared priority. What's our North Star? And how are we using data, both quantitative and qualitative, to move us towards that thing that we want to solve? As Liz said, Liz was nice. I mean, I'll say it more frankly. We don't like working with each other in this region. The fragmentation is significant, but we all have access to data, which should guide us to a particular destination. So a shared priority is pretty much requiring us to take a look at data, agree on the data sources that we're using, and also incorporate community perspective and insight into it, and then from there, determine the strategies we're going to use in order to hit the place that we want to hit.
That's great, well said. Yeah, I think I'd really just add to that around, measure the systems. Systems aren't designed to measure themselves. They're often designed to measure youth outcomes and really specific, narrow outcomes for young people, and all too often from a deficit basis. So I think the call there, building from that point around measurement, is cultivating system measures. And I might kind of have some bookends around there where we can distill measures from conversations with young people, with teachers, with building leaders who really know the complex ecosystems in which learning occurs. And with that, we have a much richer sense of learning. I think we have a very tidy architect for how learning or how student outcomes really happen. We think if we, change one little input, we're going to see these outcomes. But really, learning, and I'm again just using learning as an example. I think we could put a lot of things in there. Doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in classrooms, it happens at home, it happens in community with youth programs. And so the more that we can really have a fuller information tapestry, the better. And I think it also then invites being in the ambiguity of it all. I think we're really used to wanting a thumbs up, thumbs down from evaluation if things are working or not working. And I think any researcher or statistician will say, there's no one perfect model. There's always going to be exogenous variables. So it's really up to us to measure as much as we can in a really sustainable way. The climate, the context, the policies, the cultural assets at home, all of these components are so key for young people to thrive and navigate their school communities effectively, and none of those are in our administrative databases. So I think it does take some infrastructure and take some patience with that infrastructure as well. And maybe my caveat here for system measures is but don't re-ask the community same questions, right? Like how do we really cultivate a set of system measures? I think Seattle's guardrails is a really good example of that work, and a district that also has a really robust student climate survey. So I think our capacity to build out those systems in important ways and draw from them and use them as sources of accountability.
Great. Thank you. So it sounds like some difference makers include relationship development, data collection and data understanding not just the data about student outcomes, but systems data that tells us how systems are functioning. And then Michael, from your perspective, really thinking about the having a North Star and a goal. I almost lost you, but I got it. Michael, along those lines, one of the things we've talked about is that collective impact really requires people to readjust their thinking and to move from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, to move from thinking about what's good for you individually to thinking broadly about what's best for community. And we see that in our school systems too. People think a lot about what's good for my kid and my student, but are they also thinking about the way the system is serving students broadly, and especially those least served by our current systems? So when you think about collective impact strategy and collaborative efforts, how do you inspire and motivate people to come along with you and shift from individual to collective thinking?
Thanks, Lisa. So I don't know if I call it a privilege, but I mean, I've had the luxury of working on and leading many collective impact efforts. And I think one of the things that people sometimes get confused on, collaboration is not collective impact. Two different things. Collective impact is you're moving in together. And that's not always easy. It's a challenge, you know, where's the toothpaste? So part of the collective impact approach is, and Liz made note to it, but it's a relationship building piece. But it goes beyond the relationship building piece. It goes back to that shared priority that I mentioned. Where are we heading and why are we heading there? And it's always thinking about the end user. Collective impact means leaving your issues and your wants at the door because you are working for a greater good. Collective impact is about you can't solve it on your own. You need to work with others in order to get to that outcome. One of the things that my team, Civic Commons, we talk about is that in order to get to the transformational, we need to build, or in some cases, rebuild the relational and experience the transactional together. What we do in this town is believe that we can engage at the transactional, and that'll get us to the transformative. Last time I checked, we don't solve anything when we do that. We get nice outputs, we pat ourselves on the back, but fundamentally we didn't solve the issue. So collective impact, or at least moving from the scarcity to the abundance, has to be around the relational and that end user piece. One quick example. Right now we're convening a 100 institution network, King, Pierce, Thurston, around increasing Black home ownership. So as you can imagine, we have various sectors who don't like working with each other, and rightfully so, yet aligning them around a shared priority took 6 months. We had to build the relationships and strengthen the relationships, and then leading them to identify what their shared priority was. 1,500 new low moderate income Black homeowners over a 5-year period. Not my priorities, theirs. Then what are the strategies that we're going to take? And from there, getting them to work with each other, which isn't easy. So sometimes you have to play therapist, you have to play counselor. Sometimes you have to be the parent and force them to do certain things. But fundamentally, you know, the thing about collective impact is that you're in it together. You celebrate the wins, you celebrate the losses, and you figure out how to continue moving forward in service to the people that we're trying to create the better outcomes for.
Love it. Thank you, Michael. I love the image of moving in together. Pick up your dirty socks. Liz, one of CSEC's founding premises is nothing about us without us. It's one of our Office of AAMA's founding premises as well. Can you tell us who's at the table at CSEC? How do you make sure all necessary voices are represented? And how does authentic community participation make a difference?
Yeah, well, I will share that it is actively working to bring these folks to the table, because there is no one moment that you will have everyone. This is moving, right? And so we have community partners, educators, parents, family, folks who have a care and a desire to support education, and we bring them together into various spaces, formal, informal, to just build relationship, but then to strategize on where and how we arrive at this mystical land of educational justice, right? And so at the table, we work actively in making sure that we have representation from those who aren't in traditional spaces, folks who need a meeting late in the evening evening or who need the notes on the meeting because they weren't even able to take time away to attend in-person spaces. And the idea is that because we know we are actively bringing different groups together, our strategies are ever evolving in terms of how do we engage this community, right? And so our helpful factor is that we're geographically focused in Southeast Seattle, which helps us at least build somewhat of an artificial boundary to contain who we're putting in that space, but really thinking intentionally about who is there. And traditionally speaking, Southeast Seattle has been one of the most diverse regions of the city. They continue to be, and it's folks who are multi-generational Black families, but also immigrant and refugee communities, and to really understanding who is there. And as Michael shared, and thinking through evaluation systems, it's about thinking of we're not representing ourselves in those spaces, but the students who we're advocating for and listening. And I think that's the big key about this work that we do in our coalition, is that it's about listening, right? So my role, our role at CSEC is what are all our different partners, our different community stakeholders saying, and how do we put that together to move direction forward? And I'll conclude by saying that, again, this is ever work, because just when you think you have one strategy to move forward, something happens. And the last thing that happened was the pandemic. We had strategies of family engagement, early learning, more community involvement, and had a mapped out vision, and then pandemic shifts everything to rapid response. So we're emerging out of that, and it's like, do we go right back to those strategies that we had in 2019, or has the strategy changed? And that's what we're listening for right now, right? And so I think we've started to collect some of that information and are starting to piece together where we're headed. But all of that is done by understanding the context of what has come behind us. And I think that's the key element that I want to conclude on, is that we can't move forward unless we understand what we're coming from to be able to move forward stronger, right? And so it does require us learning a little bit of our history, which, for better or for worse, it's a necessary component of moving a movement forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Liz. And I would just shout out CSEC. They are truly effective in community engagement and creating those spaces where community really comes together to solve problems. So it's a model for all of us to look at when we're thinking about collective impact. Dr. Cooley, you spent much of your career digging into data and data approaches related to K-12 education and equity in our region. I'm a super Dr. Cooley fan because I'm secretly a total data nerd. Well-researched data can be a catalyst for getting the community inspired and motivated to work together, and it can also tell us what kind of progress we're making. And to your point, where systems are and are not working. What have you learned in your research, and are there any stories from our region that you think need to be told that have flown under the radar?
Thanks for that. I might split that question too, because I do feel like that under the radar component is discrete. Our systems, most public agencies and K-12 districts included, are really designed to support students. And so the capacity that it takes to cultivate and, run a study and share it and communicate it out to a community audience is its own work, for no shortage of spreadsheets and relational databases, and we're in a very data-rich environment. And I think maybe 10 years ago I would have said data access is the challenge, but I think the environment that we're in now is an environment where capacity for inference and capacity for communication are truly some of the things to focus on. To your point about data stories, I think there's a lot that we learn, and we kind of have also already known, about young people, what they need to succeed, what they need to thrive, what they need from systems and adults to be able to have the opportunity to pursue a path of their choosing. We know in our region, it requires post-secondary education, a 2-year, 4-year technical degree to be able to stay in the zip code that you were born. And so our due diligence, our call as adults is to support those enabling environments. So, I think a lot of actually the data you have in your impact report are a lot of the data maybe that I would kind of share and highlight and elevate and also, celebrate. Like Seattle had the state's #1 in direct enrollment rate for the class of 2021. ERDC just released the rates for the graduating class of 2022, and Seattle came in second. And so this is a time when post-secondary enrollment is going down, so we really can learn from, from case studies, from, zooming in on high schools that are succeeding over time with getting their young people, not just to, but to and through post-secondary. So I think that's, a space and a topic where there is a lot of good intentional cross-sector momentum and spaces that we should really lean into. I think the last thing I would say and maybe underscore is the muscles and the routines for inference, and kind of, go back to something that was mentioned earlier around, our capacity for nuance is abundant when we're thinking of our own child and our own children, and is just so limited when we're thinking about the collective, the young people that are here in our region. And I think that's why not just setting these tables, but sustaining and maintaining these tables is really the work. And it takes a lot of intentional planning around how do we not just in a black box come up with what the research findings were, but really doing that through intentional design processes. So I think youth action research is one approach with the Office of AMA and some of our local high schools and folks in the College of Ed. We're able to sustain a program in the district for a few years where young people are our best researchers, and families know so much. And so how do we really lean on those questions, lean on their capacity for inquiry, and I think drive our strategies based on a richer sense of that information. Otherwise, we're just pursuing our goals and we're not going to be able to be nimble. We're not going to be able to have our finger on the pulse of student needs.
Great, thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions from the audience, thanks to those of you who submitted. So our first question is, what can philanthropy and other organizations across Seattle do to impact early childhood education and affordable childcare? Is there someone who wants to take a stab at that question?
So in my past life, I was a grant maker. So I'll take the first stab at this one. A number of things. Once again, clarity in terms of what is it that, whether it's philanthropy or what are you trying to solve? But I would also hold to, you can't solve this big issue on your own. So what conversations might be occurring within philanthropy, kind of philanthropy getting its own house in order, organizations outside that are kind of doing the same thing. What connections back to the district or to the city. So, to some extent, this is a great kind of collective impact example of what's the issue, what outcome are we after, and then what stakeholders need to be involved in order to do it. And once again, as a recovering, grant maker, I will say, philanthropy or philanthropic organizations do collaborate with each other. It can be challenging, but they do, and the bridge between philanthropy with the public sector and nonprofits tends to be strong. But once again, a lot of these issues, it's a long play, and I think we lack the patience sometimes to have that long play in order to really see things through its ultimate conclusion.
Mm-hmm. I love that point, Michael. I think, coming out of the pandemic, there were a lot of questions about how students had moved forward on test scores and coming from the media and other spaces. And it was first of all, it's just an interesting way to think about progress. And also, when we think about students continuing to achieve, we're not going to see overnight success. We're not going to see a success when we're faced with significant challenges. And it is always a long-term play. Shifts in education really have to be thought about in the long term. I think that's all of our questions.
Can I add?
Oh, please, jump in.
I will add that it's necessary to listen to those who are already discussing the problem too, because I think oftentimes there's this necessity to say, well, we as philanthropists have some data and we have a solution and we're going to drive this forward, and that can bulldoze through strategies that community has already been developing, been networking, been working on. And so it's a necessity to ensure that you do an assessment of what is working and how those strategies could expand before just coming in and saying, okay, here's the solution to the problem that you are facing, which oftentimes results in moving you this way versus moving towards solution forward. And so I think that it's hard because we all come in well-intentioned, and as philanthropists, like, I imagine that that's what you want to do. You want to give back, but not at the expense of folks rooted in that work who have been actively working on problems like these, right? And so I really do want that to resonate.
Thank you so much. We do have another question. What cross-sector engagement and collaboration is happening to support Native American Indian communities? And how can we apply principles from today's conversation to advance Indigenous justice?
Well, I'll start and say that that's work that we need to grow, at least at CSEC for sure. I think it's an area of care, and as we think about students who are not served by our current educational system, Native American students are right there in the priority of who we must serve. I think oftentimes we get caught up in the data saying, well, there's only 1% of urban Native Americans in the region, and therefore it's not a critical mass, but that's irrelevant. They're here and they need our support, and I think I would invite organizations to come join us and help us be better in serving that community, because it's something we want to do, but do require support in doing it authentically and real. And so please reach out to us because we want to do some of that work.
And that data has also systematically undercounted our Indigenous communities and Native American students. The way that we roll up, our 7 federal racial categories really makes a lot of communities invisible. I think there's a lot to really look at when it comes to reporting out. I know there's a lot of work that OSPI has been doing per a lot of the community advocacy that happened, maybe 7-8 years ago, to ensure that we have more detailed racial categories. In the next year, we'll be seeing opportunities to look at, variance within community experiences, and hopefully do more maximum, representation of communities. I think, our Indigenous communities are very much impacted by how we report out.
Absolutely. I love the question. It's, as Liz referenced, it's a student population that is among the least served by our current educational system, so paying attention and thinking about how we can come together to support that student population is really critical. A final question from the audience. What collective impact strategy have you seen to innovative teacher preparation programs, such as residencies and apprenticeships, open up new pathways for talented individuals to enter the teaching profession and address ongoing teacher shortages?
It's a great question. I am not aware of any such strategy. I know that just in terms of collective impact, it's been more, I think, targeted towards educational outcomes for students. But I'm just kind of thinking through from a teacher development or talent development. Nothing's popping into my head.
Yeah, I think that's like a priority for a lot of agencies, but the collective impact component of it is where I was, maybe kind of stumbling to think of an example. And again, I don't know the entire kind of field, and there's probably lots of strategies happening. The work of the Alliance is one of them. But I think that's also something that we should think about across educators, especially in early childhood educators. We also struggle to retain. And so maybe a point to underscore is that it's, not just getting more folks into the system, but ensuring that we're supporting them, that they're partnered with mentor teachers, and that we actually have structures to keep them in the classrooms. Ultimately, that's the environment that our young people experience. Our teachers, who they themselves are supported, and so being able to retain our teachers really has to come alongside a lot of the pipeline programs.
And I'll just reference the Seattle Teacher Residency, which we run at the Alliance for Education in close partnership with the University of Washington, Seattle Public Schools, and the Seattle Education Association. And it's actually a unique teacher preparation program in its field in that all those players are at the table, the districts, the university, the union, and the Alliance as sort of the convening party and fundraising support, as well as management support. So in that sense, I don't know that we've ever called it a collective impact strategy, but we really work to think about like who are the folks that really are gonna be most impacted by gaps in teacher preparation? How do we make sure we're listening to what's happening in our classrooms with our teachers and what's needed? And really bringing teachers into the system that are gonna best serve our students, particularly in our Title I environment. So in that sense, it is actually a model that's sort of aligned with the collective impact thinking. But this conversation will be an interesting way to sort of think about what else might we do to evolve it, given some of the things you brought up.
It's a good example of cross-sector collaboration, which is a necessary element of all strategies in education, where you think of who needs teachers, the school building, the students, but in reality, our society as a whole needs teachers, right? And I think that's the challenge with some of our education questions, that they're only centered around maybe those who have kids in school or those who work in schools, et cetera. But reality is public education is a necessity of all of us in society, right?
All right, last question. If we were to take on a collective impact strategy to strengthen public education and increase equity and justice for students in Seattle, what advice would you give us in getting started?
My thinking on collective impact has evolved over the years. So there are two components I would recommend. Lisa, in her remarks, made note of the really great things that are happening in the district. So one is operating from an asset base versus a deficit base. I mean, you're still trying to solve a problem. There's a gap, but working from a position of strength kind of allows some of that early success to take root. So, but also it allows for various partners, once again, to remember what they're able to bring to the potluck. I mean, I'm a metaphor guy. I'm going to keep using metaphors. So what are they bringing to the potluck and everyone gets to share on? But the second piece, and this has been the big evolution for me, collective impact originally was predicated on having an anchor organization, one organization that is going to play that coordinator kind of, but then also drive a role. We use this term now, network weaving. So one organization might play that critical kind of convener role, but as Liz just said, it's that co-ownership piece. If you have everyone feeling like ownership in a particular issue, then the success of that collective impact effort is going to be stronger. So that's where, once again, and I know, we all say yes, yet no one still wants to do it. But taking the time to build relationships, that is probably the most critical thing I will leave everyone here with. If it takes a year, it takes a year. Don't shortchange relationship building in service to get to the transactional or make funders feel great. Like, do the work, build the relationships, build trust. You are going to move so much faster and, frankly, get to your outcomes than if you shortchange and don't do it.
For me, I will give you all this advice, and that is that, I was a direct service staff for at least 5 years before stepping into this role. I know what it's like to lead a group of students, to lead a group of staff, to meet deliverables, and oftentimes your head is this way because of the amount of work that you have in front of you. And you have reporting, you have literal people that you have to work with, and this is the case for all of us in whatever field we're in. And so it's hard to look up at the systemic change that is necessary. And I advise and I invite you to take a moment to look up and figure out how you can support that advocacy as well. Because we cannot create true change, true impactful change, if we're just providing the service that's in front of us. And I speak broadly to community partners because I have been you, but I also speak to funders who oftentimes put really difficult guidelines in the work that we're doing that doesn't allow us to build that systemic change impact as well, or that, you know, the way to look up, if I could define it any other way. And so take a moment to figure out how you can plug into those spaces. We have a coalition meeting the third Thursday of the month in case you're interested. But otherwise, there's plenty of spaces beyond CSEC where you can find that activation. And that's where you'll do the relationship building that we need.
Yeah, I think I'd build on that to also say, I mean, all of these are hard things. I'd say do another hard thing first, which is, you know, what I was mentioning earlier around just these infrastructures for the, you know, we measure, our measures and our values are often, you know, intertwined. And I think when we can have that strong, you know, have those strong relationships, have a consistent table to convene and strategize and do the work around, if we also haven't been building measures that matter and co-creating what impact means, and also know that we're kind of measuring all the little steps along the way, we'll kind of be left with, you know, imperfect models, imperfect understandings of the movement that actually is happening. And I think really right-sizing that, you know, it doesn't have to be a humongous database, right, that we're talking about, but it really has to be, you know, co-owned measures that really connect to what these, what the work is, what the mechanism of change is. We think a lot about, you know, the role of educators and relationships, but we're not measuring that. We know that that's hugely impactful for young people. And how are we holding ourselves accountable to supporting those classroom ecosystems, for example. So I think the hard task when it comes to data is often measuring what matters so that we can report back out in ways that are consistent with our values. And having those in, you know, in kind of a sustainable place. We put so much investment in our administrative systems, and, you know, kind of, I think the pandemic really showed us how we could rely on qualitative inquiry, but without, you know, exercising those muscles and having those routines to listen, to see what we've done, to come back with new information. Without those routines for continuous improvement and learning with information, you know, we also won't go as far. We won't be able to share out good work in multiple ways, and it does take multiple ways of knowing.
Well, thank you so much to our incredible panelists as we have explored this idea of what would it look like to have a collective impact strategy for Seattle Public Schools and to support Seattle students. We talked to this set of panelists and thought, well, we'll definitely save seats for these three at the table, so get ready for your invitation if that comes to be. But I want to thank you all for joining us today. It's been such a joy, and can we please give our panelists one more round of applause.